Schutters, vandaag hebben we iemand best wel speciaal, zeg ik het zelf. We hebben Will Sherman vandaag. Hij is van middeleeuwen arrows en hij is een expert als het gaat om maken van replica's van pijlen. Hij heeft helaas geen videomateriaal, dus we hebben alleen geluid. En ik heb een aantal foto's erbij gestopt van wat hij ongeveer doet. Veel plezier. Will Sherman, thank you very much for having us to talk about archery. And for the people who don't really know, you are an arrowsmith and an arrow maker fletcher. That's how you call it in English, if I'm right.
Yeah, that's right. Arrowsmith and Fletcher. Yeah.
Yeah, precisely. And you have a very interesting Instagram page where you share everything you make. Will, to begin by the beginning, why did you even start being interested in archery?
I made a longbow, a yew longbow, before I'd even shot any bows at all. I just wanted to make something traditional.
Yeah.
So I bought a yew log on eBay.
Yeah.
And I just looked on some videos and some internet forums about how to shape them and things, and I made some kind of longbow looking thing that wasn't very good.
Yeah.
I still got it. And then I found a local bow maker, a bowyer, near me, who sort of taught me for a couple of years how to make bows.
Yeah.
In a traditional way.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of kicked off from there, really. And then once I'd got into bow making, I then obviously had to make arrows.
Yeah.
And I found a lot of amazing, talented people out there on internet forums and society pages and that kind of thing who taught me how to make arrows based roughly on the Mary Rose arrows.
Yes.
And that's where it took off. That's where my interest really kicked in from there.
Yeah. For the people who don't really know, maybe you can tell yourself about the Mary Rose, because if an Englishman needs to tell about the Mary Rose in the end.
Yeah, well, the Mary Rose is our only real physical connection to medieval archery.
Yeah.
And it was a ship. It was Henry VIII's flagship, and it sank in 1545 during battle with the French.
Yeah.
And because it sank in combat, it sank with all of the weapons on board that were being used, either during the naval battle or for later land battles and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And on that ship, they had about 140 yew warbows and over 4,000 arrows.
Wow, it's amazing.
Yeah, and it's amazing, and it's also amazing for people who are interested in clothing and food and all of these kind of things that you normally live on a ship were all preserved perfectly on that ship. It sank in a certain way where the particular levels of acid in the soil and under the water preserved everything. So it came up in 1982, 83, something like that.
83, I guess. But
83, yeah.
Yeah.
And everything was perfect. I mean, some of the things had been degraded, like the horn and the feathers and that kind of thing had gone,
Yeah.
more or less. But all of the wood was complete.
Wow.
So we've got these perfect bows, we've got the perfect arrows, we've got binding marks, we've got where the horn would have been, length, weights, measurements, everything we can take perfectly from those and make exact copies of what they were using.
Yeah, but that's your kind of specialty, right? You're making your living is making arrows, right?
Yes, that's right, yeah. Arrowheads and arrows, yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. A boy's dream, to be honest. Well, what was the most most exciting thing you found? But I guess you did also some research on the Mary Rose.
Yeah, I was very lucky to be able to kind of be given access to the storerooms and the archives by Alex Hildred, who I'm now quite good friends with.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
because of that access, I can pick up the things I want to copy, and I can measure them myself, and I can look at them very carefully. And I mean, obviously, there's loads of research out there that's already been done. There's some fantastic books on what's been found.
Yes.
And people have been looking at these things for years, ever since it came up. But it's nice to be able to go in yourself and actually decide what you want to copy, take the exact thing that you want to look at, and then do your own research and your own copy of that.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. I'm just stunned because what I really want to ask is there was any. Did you find any extraordinary thing on the arrows with modern perspective on the arrows?
No, not really, because by the time I'd got in there, everyone had kind of looked at everything already and documented everything that was interesting and new. So, for example, I think before that point, people didn't realize how big the bows were, or how big the arrows were, or how long they were, or that kind of thing. So that had all been released already.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So there were no big revelations to find there. But what was interesting for me were the tiny details, like, for example, the glues that were being used to hold the horn in, and the glues for the feathers, and the way that they were bound on and tied off at the end.
Yeah, yeah. So,
I mean, yeah, go on.
no, you were telling.
I mean, one of the things that I found recently was that up to that point, everyone had thought that you put a piece of horn in the end of an arrow, which reinforces the knock, so that when the bow's loose, they don't split open the end of the arrow.
Yes.
That was fairly common knowledge. And up to that point, when I went to look, I realized everyone was cutting that knock slot with a hacksaw or something like that.
Yeah.
And it didn't look right to me up to that point, because it always looked too big, too wide, the gap. Mm-hmm. So I went in and had a look with some friends of mine, and we realized fairly quickly that what they were actually doing was just putting a knife blade in the end of the arrow shaft and just splitting it open.
Oh, really?
Yeah, rather than cutting it. That gives you a really, really tiny, very straight split, which you can then put a very thin piece of horn in that's tapered. And that suddenly matches exactly what they were doing, rather than this kind of big, thick piece of horn, which didn't quite look right to me.
Yeah, it sounds traditional at least, and easy to do, because in the end, everyone wants to do things easily.
And quickly. It's got to be really quick. If you're making thousands of arrows for warfare and campaign, you can't be there hand sawing every single slot. It's not going to work.
No, exactly. And what kind of glues did they use for the Merry Rose?
Well, to put the horn into the arrow knock, they used animal skin glue, like hide glue,
yeah,
or maybe fish glue.
Mm-hmm.
And then my main research on these were the glues used for the feathers.
Yes.
And it was thought before that they were being glued on again with an animal hide glue, and then bound with silk.
Yeah.
And then the binding covered with something else, which had a green tint in there. So people thought it was copper verdigris.
Yes.
To give you that colour. Mm-hmm. And when I went to have a look, I was still working on that premise, and I realised that the glues were underneath where the feathers were, so they can't have been glued down and then covered in this green mixture. It had to go on first.
Yes.
And that's what I started developing with an amazing guy called Guido in Germany.
Okay. Yeah.
He kind of figured out fairly quickly that you could dip or paint this thick glue mixture on.
Yes.
Set the feathers in, bind them up, and then reheat this mixture, and it would flow over the bindings and flow over the feather bases, and everything would be sealed in this nice hard layer.
Oh wow, so coating.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's quite efficient actually, because if I want to lacquer my bindings, then I find it very difficult, so I don't do it. Because you're touching the feathers, and that's not what you want. But if you can, yeah. Oh, that's actually quite smart, to be honest. Yeah. You're also arrowsmith?
Yes. Yeah, yes. I make the arrowheads myself as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Are there any, rare finds from the Merry Rose on arrowheads?
Well, no. That's the one thing that's missing is all of the metalwork, because that degraded really quickly in the water.
Oh.
And annoyingly, what they did find when they went down there to first pick things up was they found the impression of the arrowheads in the mud that had been left by the iron rusting.
Yes. Oh,
but
really?
They couldn't preserve that. Yeah, so people who went down there know what shape the heads were, but they've forgotten by now, and they couldn't take photos at that point underwater. I'm not quite sure why. They have got photos of some things underwater, but they just didn't document that. So we don't really know for sure what heads were being used on the Merry Rose.
Oh, that's. But you quite recently you made a video where you did make some historical arrowheads around the Merry Rose, right?
Sorry, say that again.
Quite recently you made a video with arrowheads that would kind of match arrows from the Merry Rose, right?
Yeah, that was is that the Todd's workshop video?
Yes, indeed, yes.
Yeah, we were trying to do sort of mid-1400s armor penetration testing.
Yes.
So that's quite a long way before the Merry Rose, but the only arrows we have are the Merry Rose ones to look at. So we had to take those arrows.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah.
but we were able to use heads that had been found way before the Mary Rose, or the MR as we call it, which do fit in with the time period. So we were using 1400 arrowheads for our testing, which we thought was a better approximation.
Yeah. All right. Another question. What's the most difficult part about a medieval arrow? Is that the fletching, the wood selection, or the arrowhead making?
I think it's the arrowhead making, because you can get to a very good standard of making an arrow with the arrow shaft and the fletching and the binding and all of that stuff.
Yes.
It's fairly easy to copy pictures of what people have been doing. You can get pretty much there fairly quickly, but the arrowhead making is a whole other skill on its own.
Really?
And a lot of people, I mean, for example, people don't have access to a forge, so it's harder for them to do it anyway.
Yeah, true.
But when they do have access to a forge, one of the things that you find people do a lot is make the wall of the socket, which goes onto the arrow shaft, very thick and very heavy, which isn't right.
Oh, they are.
Sorry?
Yeah,
Sorry?
go ahead. Carry on.
But yeah, I mean, and so there's that one element, and then there's also the head itself, the point itself.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to see in photos what they're actually meant to look like in cross-section.
Yes.
So until you've actually handled the real ones and you can look at them and you can copy them, it's tricky to get them right. And that's where a lot of people tend to go wrong, is using the wrong type of heads or making them incorrectly and not getting the results that they're expecting.
All right. So you're always double-checking your arrowheads and weighing them and such kind of things?
Yep, got to be. If you're doing any testing, you have to make sure that you're using the right thing. Otherwise, you get into the kind of the danger zone of making what you think is right, and then your results. Even if you're just doing, for example, flight shooting an arrow to see how far it would have gone back then.
Mm-hmm.
If the head is wrong and the feathers are wrong and the length is wrong and everything's kind of slightly off, there's no point doing the testing because you're not using.
Yeah, I get that. How much time does it take to make a set of arrows of 6, roughly?
Well, I've timed one.
Yes.
For everything is an hour and a half.
For everything is an hour and a half. For every arrow.
Yeah, doing it properly. So using an iron head that you make yourself is about 7 minutes.
Yes.
And then everything else is about an hour and 25 minutes or something. From hand planing a piece of wood down to an arrow shaft and tapering it, to preparing the feathers, to making the glue, to fitting the horn, binding it. All of that is about an hour and a half.
Yeah. So you think that it's reasonable? Back in the day, you had a fletcher and an arrowsmith and a shaft maker probably, who all did their own thing, and that's
definitely.
Yeah, not one.
And I think that even the fletchers, even if you've got someone making arrow shafts, if that's done in a shop on their own, I would imagine they've probably got a conveyor belt system for that as well. So one person would do the bulk of the work over and over again, and then they'd pass on those arrow shafts to the next person who would taper them or smooth them out, and then go to the next person who would finish them. So everything's moving really quickly.
Yeah. So you're basically a one-man workshop for arrow make, one village probably.
Yeah.
Making arrows. Yeah. Wow. Well, what are the most special arrows you have ever made?
Ooh. I do like making the really exacting copies of the MR arrows because they feel like you're holding the real thing at that point.
All right. Yeah.
But I also like kind of copying obscure medieval artwork sometimes. So you see, hunting pictures of really extreme, large hunting broadheads that are quite fun to make.
Really?
And yeah, because they're always drawn extreme. They're drawn oversized so that people can see what they're looking at. And it's quite fun sometimes to make them that big because they kind of look almost like a Hollywood arrow.
Yeah. So you're very convinced that the arrows on pictures of medieval times are not the real thing?
Probably. I'm sure some of them were really accurate. There's a lot of paintings out there that have got amazing detail, and I'm sure a lot of them were done perfectly. Yeah. But I think, like all artwork, you exaggerate the things that are important.
Yeah.
So they made the clothing more vibrant, more extreme, more special, and the arrows would have been the same, and the bows would have been drawn as big as possible with these great big knots and things on them to make everything look a little bit more clear and more obvious.
Yeah, I get that. As an replica maker of arrows. How many of you are there actually making replicas?
Quite a few now. There's a lot of really good arrow makers and fletchers and arrowsmiths in the country.
Okay.
Because of the kind of the wealth of knowledge out there on the internet now, it's really easy to find what other people have been doing for their research.
Yeah.
And you can either copy that directly and just make your own and then start selling them, or you can use that research and go off and do your own research on top of it. And there's a lot of people out there now who've got the time and they've got the skill and they've got the dedication to do it properly, which is really good.
That's good, yeah. Is there a special kind of value to preserve this skill, do you think?
I think so. It's a difficult one because it's not a necessary skill or art, really, when you think about it, making bows and arrows.
No.
It's one of those things that, especially for an English person, it's the kind of the most English weapon you can think of, the English longbow. It's called the English longbow.
Yeah, true, yeah.
So you need to, I think it's important to have some way of preserving that, otherwise it would just disappear and be another lost art like many other things are. So it's good that a lot of people are still keeping it going and fighting to keep it accurate.
Yeah, true. Because you also really think that you're an Englishman, so yeah. I can imagine, yeah. Do you have any tips for people who want to go in historical archery?
Yeah, my tip is always look at the originals and do your best to copy, because otherwise you get into the danger of kind of making things that you think are right. And then when you look at the real ones, you're miles off because you've kind of lost track of where you're meant to be. So, for example, if you were interested in forging arrowheads,
yes,
rather than going on YouTube and looking at someone making a bodkin,
yeah,
the best thing to do is to pick an exact head from a museum, and they're all out there now online on their online catalogues, and just pick one that you like and just get that right, do it properly, so that you know you're making a proper thing.
Yeah. To continue on that, do you think that arrowsmiths back in the day made always the same arrowhead?
No, no way. There were probably trends. As armor developed, the head would have to develop to defeat that armor.
Yeah.
So you'd have certain heads that were made a lot. But I think just in human nature, you want to experiment, you want to try new things, you get bored of doing the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, true.
And the quality would definitely vary. There'd be some really good arrowsmiths, like master arrowsmiths, who were making perfect arrowheads every single time. But they'd have apprentices, and they'd have people lesser than them who they just had to knock out hundreds of heads to make the orders complete.
Yeah.
So they'd be quite low quality, or they'd be quite different.
Yes.
And you do see that in historical heads that are being dug up in museums and things. They're all of a very different quality, but some are fantastic quality.
Yeah. So you can almost tell if it's a master or an apprentice who made them.
Yeah. And also they follow a pattern quite interestingly. You can have two heads from two very different parts of the country that look identical because they're following what is obviously at that point a standard arrowhead pattern.
Oh, really?
Set by yeah. I mean, there's a fantastic arrowsmith called John Beavis who recently did copies of two arrowheads, Type 16 barbed arrowheads, and they're almost identical but found in completely different parts of the country. So they must have been working to a pattern, but they were just miles apart.
Do you think that would be sort of a centralized body who does make those trends, or do you think it's just natural occurrence that somebody says, "Oh, that's a good arrowhead," and everyone makes them?
I don't know. It's an interesting question. It's something that might need to be looked into. But I would imagine that there is some governing body that says this is what we're going to use. This is how you make them. If they don't conform to this pattern, they're not good enough, and we won't pay you for them.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable. Yeah. Well, do you work together with bowyers making arrows, or just mostly on your own?
On my own mainly. I make my own bows as well, so I tend to do everything here. But I am currently working with a fantastic bladesmith called Tom Timbrell.
Yeah.
Who specialises in historic cutlery and historic weapons. So we're working in the forge together. When I'm making arrowheads, he's making knife blades.
Yeah. All right. Yeah.
And then I come home and do my own arrow making and bow making here.
Oh yeah. Right. Awesome. So, I saw it on Instagram. You have both in that recently moved to an old forge. right?
Yeah, it's a beautiful 12th century forge that it's always been a forge. It was a blacksmithing farrier's forge right from the 1100s.
Oh wow! So you got the history document that it. Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing in there.
Wow. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Dit was Will Sherman van Middeleeuwen Arrows. Beneden vind je de link naar zijn Instagram page, zodat je ook wat meer werk van hem kan zien. En hem ook eventueel kan volgen mocht je het leuk vinden. Volgende keer hebben we Jan van der Veen, deel 1. Het was een lang gesprek, dus ik heb hem even moeten opknippen om het een beetje behapbaar te houden. Stay safe, stay home en tot de volgende keer.